routine like this? Okay. You don't want me to be like Sheldon Cooper and just stare into the camera? I am Norman Glass. I'm an Overland Park firefighter. I've worked for the Overland Park Fire Department for 28 years, and I have 4 years as volunteer time, so I've been here 32 years. I grew up on State Line Road, and way before I could drive, I used to see the Leawood volunteers running up and down State Line when they'd make fire calls and medical calls, and of course they all had sirens on their individual cars, which attracted attention and it caught my interest. And when I finally got my driver's license, I would follow some of those volunteers on calls in my car, and of course the Leawood police talked to me about that, and I got in a little bit of trouble about that. But I finally figured out that they were actually helping people, and I liked what they were doing, that they were going out and helping something and walking away with some good results. Because I lived in Missouri, I could not join the Leawood Fire Department. Eventually I moved to Overland Park and was able to sign up as a volunteer in the day when we were actively recruiting volunteers. And then I became an EMT after I was a volunteer, and then applied. I applied twice. I applied once in '86 and didn't get hired. Then I applied again in '87 and did get hired. I'm sure my parents thought I was crazy when I told them I was getting on as a paid firefighter. I know my dad thought I was nuts, but I don't think he thinks that now. My first shift as paid was Jim Rob McKenzie. Phil Fisher was the lieutenant. Richard Stump, Mike Grove, Dale Backless, Hank DuPont, Tom Brandt, and myself. Of course, all those guys are retired now except for Tom, and I believe Phil Fisher has passed, but that was my first shift. Learned a lot from those guys. Those are some very good firefighters. A lot of common sense from that group. When I started as a volunteer, we had, of course, no AEDs. We had no thermal imaging cameras. We had no CGIs. For a house fire, they would just dispatch Overland Park, a house, and an address, and you had to know your area, and they sent 2 pumpers. That was it. Then, when I got hired in '88, we had 1 CGI, which is on the battalion chief car. And after that, we slowly got AEDs, and then we got 1 thermal imaging camera, and more. Of course, CAFs back then was never heard of, and slowly more trucks got added to the response matrix, and more of those equipment, AEDs and life packs and thermal imaging cameras, were placed on vehicles. And I've seen a lot of changes. We were a little bit smaller. We had the 2 north stations. Station 4, right when I got hired, became a 2-truck station. There's Station 3, the old Westgate station, which is 1 truck. We weren't doing Stanley at that time. We hadn't taken over that. And it was a smaller organization. Bill Janke was chief. And we had 3 battalion chiefs. We didn't have a training center or training officer. There was a shift training officer that would come around. And you did more on shift with your captain. He would work a little bit with you. There weren't RIT teams back then. I think the gear is actually a lot better now. And now positive pressure ventilation, that we weren't doing that. We would ventilate back then, but it was just with we had these electric fans that we used as smoke ejectors. And then after a fire, you'd have to go back and take it apart and clean it up, because of course it'd get very dirty during the fire. One extreme memory I have, probably the best memory, is on the way to work one Sunday morning. I discovered a building fire, and this was in 91 or 92, way before cell phones. So I drove, it was down the street from Station 2 where I was stationed, and I hightailed it to Station 2 and went running in there. Said, hey, we got a building fire down the street. Of course, half the guys didn't believe me, but it was a significant fire. At the time, that particular shift, at about 8:01 in the morning when the other guys left, we would be out the door with the trucks to First Watch to eat breakfast. Every weekend morning and every holiday. That was the shift. Then we'd come back and do our daily, our weekend duties or whatever we did. That particular morning, I disrupted that breakfast by several hours while we fought that little building fire. We had an arsonist back in the mid to late 80s burning apartment buildings. And I fought a lot of those as a volunteer. Like every week there's another apartment building under construction that was burned. And eventually that person was caught and prosecuted for that. And throughout the years there's been some very significant fires that I've seen. Whether it be helping someone off the floor or helping someone that is very ill, and we've gone and helped that person and improved their life from what it was when I found them. I do enjoy that. When I started as a volunteer, Phil French was a volunteer. He was a volunteer from 1971 to 1989, where unfortunately he passed away. He worked for Channel 9 and he had a TV camera, and he was also our media manager. His job as media manager wasn't much more than filming a fire that he went to for TV9 and making a copy of an old VHS tape. And he would hand that tape to a couple stations and we could watch raw footage of fires all over the city, including ours. He didn't do any PIO, he didn't do any training tapes or anything like that. Then one day in your office, Jason, I saw on the wall pictures of all the media managers except for Phil French. By mere coincidence, I ran into his son because I had an OPFD t-shirt on. And his son asked me if I worked for OP, and I said, yeah, I do. And he said, oh, do you know how long? And I said, well, a long time. He said, did you know Phil French? And I said, yeah, sure, I knew Phil. He said, well, that's my dad. Really? Hey, I need to talk to you. I need a picture of your dad. What for? And I explained, and it took him a few weeks, and he got me a picture, which I gave to you, and you mounted on the wall. So now that piece of history for the OPFD is complete. I have really enjoyed my career here. I feel this has been a good fire department for me. Yes, I would have liked a few more fires. I enjoyed fighting fire, and in later years, we certainly haven't gotten those. But I really enjoyed this. I thought we were a good, progressive department. I thought we were a safe department. I would see on the news where another fire department would be in a house, and I'm like, that was really like totally involved, and I'm like, God, they would never send us in on something like that. We'd fight the fire from the outside. And I know there's pros and cons to doing that, but I've really enjoyed working here. And I will miss being here, that's for sure. Level-headed guy that came and did his job, and wasn't bad to work with. I hope they remember that part.